He had drawn up a list of requirements for his future duchess, the way another man might commission a piece of furniture. Obedient, soft-spoken, decorative, biddable as a well-trained spaniel. The Duke of Ashmore had been explicit, precise, and utterly insufferable about it, and every soul in London society knew it. What no one knew, what no one could have known, was that the woman he had chosen to fulfill every single one of those requirements had, just 3 nights before their engagement was announced, defeated the finest swordsman in all of Paris in a candle-lit cellar beneath the Palais Royal. She had done it in 17 seconds. She had not even broken a sweat. Her name was Miss Cecilia Vane, and she was about to become the most dangerous woman the Duke of Ashmore had ever underestimated. London, in the autumn of 1814, smelled of coal smoke and ambition. The season had not yet concluded, and the drawing-rooms of Mayfair buzzed with the sort of whispered scandal that passed for entertainment among those with too much wealth and too little purpose. And at the very center of every conversation, like a cold star around which lesser planets orbited, stood Adrian Beaumont, the 7th Duke of Ashmore. He was not a cruel man. That was the tragedy of him. He was simply a man who had never once been told he was wrong, and so had constructed a world entirely from his own assumptions. He was 31, dark-haired, with the kind of angular face that artists wept over and mothers pointed out to their daughters. His estates were immaculate, his fortune was vast, and his emotional intelligence, frankly, was catastrophic. When his solicitor presented him with the name of Miss Cecilia Vane, 3rd daughter of the late Viscount Aldermere, possessed of a modest dowry, an unremarkable reputation, and a noted tendency toward quiet, Adrian approved the match in under 4 minutes. He had not yet met her. Cecilia, for her part, had learned of the arrangement the way one learns of most unpleasant things in aristocratic households, through a letter delivered at breakfast, the contents of which she read twice before setting down her fork with the composure of a woman who had been preparing for this precise inconvenience her entire life. She was 24. She had copper-brown hair she rarely bothered to tame, ink perpetually beneath her fingernails, and eyes the color of winter seawater, gray and deep, and not entirely safe. She was the daughter of a viscount who loved her fiercely and taught her, most unfashionably, everything he himself knew: mathematics, Latin, strategy, and above all else, the blade. Her father had studied under the great Italian masters in his youth. He had passed every lesson to Cecilia in the long gallery of Aldermere House, between the oil portraits of disapproving ancestors, until she moved with the kind of unconscious grace that only true mastery produces. She could disarm a man in 3 movements. She had done so on 4 separate occasions, twice in defense of others. She had never once told a soul outside her family. Quiet, after all, is a remarkable disguise. But before Cecilia and the Duke stood face to face for the first time, before everything began to unravel in the most spectacular possible fashion, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters. Every subscription helps this channel keep bringing you the Regency romance stories you love, full of secrets, forbidden passion, and heroines who are never quite what they seem. Now, where were we? Their first meeting was at Harwick Hall, the Ashmore family seat in Hertfordshire, where Adrian had arranged a small dinner so that the prospective match might be inspected, his word had anyone asked, in a civilized setting. Cecilia arrived in a hired carriage, wearing a deep blue that her maid had pressed 3 times, with her hair arranged in fashionable curls she found deeply inconvenient. She shook the Duke's hand with a firm grip that made him blink, and then she sat through 4 courses of dinner, saying almost nothing at all. He was pleased. She was perfectly quiet. She was, in fact, conducting a meticulous study of him. She watched how he treated his servants, tolerantly, if distractedly. She watched how he deflected his mother's sharper questions with practiced charm that almost concealed its own exhaustion. She watched his hands. A duelist always watches hands. His were still, controlled, the hands of a man who kept everything locked inside. She thought, this will be complicated. He thought, excellent, this will be simple. They were both, in their own way, correct. The engagement was announced in the Gazette 3 days later. Congratulations poured in, and Adrian Beaumont returned to his London townhouse with the comfortable certainty that he had solved the problem of matrimony in a thoroughly sensible fashion. Then came the afternoon in the West Garden. It began innocuously. Cecilia had arrived for what his household termed an introductory fortnight, a chance for the future Duchess to learn the rhythms of the estate. She had nodded agreeably to the housekeeper's tour, expressed appropriate admiration for the portrait gallery, and asked several quietly intelligent questions about the household accounts that the steward found alarming. On the third afternoon, she slipped away. Adrian found her entirely by accident. He had taken the long way around the garden after a frustrating hour with his solicitor, and when he rounded the tall hedge of the West Garden wall, he stopped dead.
Cecilia stood in the center of the open lawn, coatless, her sleeves rolled above her elbows. In her right hand was a rapier, taken, he would later discover, from the display cabinet in the East Passage, and she was moving through a sequence of footwork and attack patterns with the focused, fluid precision of a professional. She had not heard him approach. He stood frozen for a full minute and watched. She was extraordinary. There was no other word for it. Every movement flowed into the next with a mathematical elegance that spoke of years, not months of practice. She was not performing, she was thinking, working through something complex, adjusting, correcting, completely lost in the geometry of it. He must have moved or breathed too loudly, because she turned. The tip of the rapier came up in one smooth motion, perfectly leveled at his throat, before she recognized him. Then she lowered it. Her expression was not guilty, not frightened, merely assessing. "Your Grace," she said calmly. He stared at her. "You," he said at last, "are not what I was told you were. I am exactly what I am. You simply did not inquire." The weeks that followed were a quiet war, and both of them knew it. Adrian demanded an explanation. Cecilia provided one, measured and factual and utterly without apology. Her father had taught her. She had continued the practice because it sharpened her mind, because she loved it, and because she saw no reason to be helpless in a world that occasionally required one not to be. She had concealed it because experience had taught her that men preferred their women decorative rather than capable. The look on his face when she said it was the first honest thing she had seen from him. He did not forbid her from continuing. He wasn't sure, for the first time in his adult life, that he had the authority. The realization was profoundly disorienting. And then came the night of Lord Pemberton's winter gathering, and the moment that split both their lives cleanly in two. It was meant to be nothing more than a formal dinner. 40 guests, a string quartet, the usual choreography of Regency social performance. Adrian had been in conversation near the fireplace when he heard his mother's sharp intake of breath behind him. He turned, and he saw it. Lord Greyfield, a man Adrian had considered until that very moment a trusted friend, standing beside Cecilia with a folded letter in his hand. His expression was the particular one worn by men who have just discovered a weapon they intend to use. "Remarkable timing," Greyfield said loudly, projecting for the nearest cluster of guests. "I've been searching for someone to corroborate this letter. It seems Miss Vane's, her late father's settlement, was never what was disclosed to Ashmore's solicitor. There was a debt, a rather catastrophic one."
He smiled pleasantly. One might say this engagement was built on a deliberate misrepresentation. The room went very quiet. Cecilia did not flinch, not one tremor crossed her face, but Adrian saw her hands, still as stone, knuckles pale. And he understood in that instant, with a clarity that arrived fully formed and entirely too late, that she had known. She had known the debt existed. She had agreed to this arrangement not from any scheme of deception, but because her family's survival had depended on it, and she had never been given an opportunity to say so. He had not inquired. He had never asked anything of her that mattered. He stepped forward. "Greyfield," Adrian said, in the tone that had silenced Parliament once and dueling opponents twice, "that letter is a private legal document. How exactly did it come to be in your possession?" A beat of silence. "I should perhaps," Adrian continued, his voice quiet as a blade drawn slowly, "request that my solicitor examine the manner in which it was obtained, particularly given that it passed through the Pemberton steward's office 3 weeks ago, which you would only know if you had paid someone inside this house to acquire it." Greyfield's smile faltered. "As for my engagement," Adrian said, turning to address the room with the full weight of a dukedom behind him, "I am aware of every particular of Miss Vane's situation. I have been aware for some time, and I find that I am in no way deterred." He stepped forward. He stood beside Cecilia. He offered her his arm. "Shall we?" he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, a look that asked several questions at once, none of them small. Then she took his arm. They spoke afterwards on the terrace in the cold night air, while the string quartet resumed indoors and the scandal began its rapid reconfiguration into a story about Greyfield's disgrace. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know." He looked out over the dark garden. "I owe you a significant apology." "Yes," she agreed, because she was not a woman who deflected honest things. "I drew up requirements," he said, as though a wife were a specification, as though the only quality worth having was absence of inconvenience. He was quiet for a moment. "I have spent weeks watching you, Miss Vane, and I find that everything I believed I wanted was, in every meaningful sense, wrong." She turned to look at him properly. The moonlight caught the angle of his face, and for the first time since she had arrived in his orbit, she saw him without his armor. "Then what do you find that you want?" she said carefully. He looked at her. "Someone who makes the world sharper, truer, someone I cannot predict." A pause. "Someone who could, if necessary, disarm me in 3 movements." "Fewer," she said, and he laughed, a real laugh, nothing controlled about it. They were married in the chapel at Harwick Hall on a grey December morning, with frost on the window panes and candlelight warm against the stone. It was not a grand ceremony, it was an honest one. And on the morning after their wedding, Adrian Beaumont appeared in the long gallery at dawn, coatless, entirely unsure of himself, with 2 rapiers in his hands and an expression of determined humility. "Teach me," he said. Cecilia looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, rare and real and entirely devastating, and took the blade from his hand. Some lessons, it turns out, are worth beginning late. If this story moved you, if you believe that the best love stories are built not on what we demand, but on what we are willing to discover, subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters and share this with someone who knows that quiet women always have the most extraordinary secrets. Until next time, the most dangerous thing a mind can do is underestimate the woman standing right beside him.